why just some white people see things and start to internalize them and think about them more deeply and say, oh God, my part to play in this is to relinquish my power, to, like Jesus said, to love your neighbor as yourself or even greater than yourself, to hand over, to not only share power, but to give power to other people. And I know a lot of this is fear-based. A lot of this is sort of even, I believe, a human evolution issue, a consciousness issue. And I think we're seeing a very rapid increase in the development of consciousness of human beings. But we're living in a world where people are in different places on their journey of evolution and consciousness. And, just from a universal spiritual sort of aspect, that this seems to be some kind of process, that people have to go through, just regardless of religion.
Mm-hmm.
But from a spiritual standpoint of the spirit of the human being.
Mm-hmm.
I think one frustration that I've always run into as a writer is, I've written articles about my upbringing, times when I have gotten things very wrong, my ignorance, times where I have just not realized anything about systemic racism in America. And I've tried to be very transparent as a model for other white people. And I think you do the same thing. And I think, a lot of us would like to see white people get to a point of consciousness and evolution where they can be less fear-based and really step into a role of giving over power, giving over voices, giving over opportunities. And, it seems like some people can do that. Some people, and I think we've been a witness to this with the Trump campaign and his election, and his exercise of power, that fear-based, unevolved, unconscious, toxic American whiteness can really be easily piqued with fear-based agendas and nostalgic narratives and things like that. So do you have any thoughts about how we start to make, and this is the purpose of this whole honest white people thing, is, how do we start to model a process of consciousness and evolution where white people can work humbly and feel secure in stepping back from this power that they have grasped onto for so long?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. I think there are a couple of elements that are important responses to that question. The first is that we tend to underestimate the power of listening.
Mm.
And so, we white people are so quick to say the way it should be, or to do that. And listening is just so valuable. Again, going back to my experience in Pakistan, it was similar, that we Americans tend to go to Pakistan to tell them how to be about the what's best for them as a country. And our model was to go and simply first listen to their stories. And until you hear another's story, two things. One, they probably won't hear yours. And, and number two, you will only have a partial, seeing through a lens darkly kind of thing in terms of what reality is. So listening is really important. That's the first thing I would say. And to allowing others to tell their story. The second thing that I would say is this perspective of vulnerability that we need to assume, or the mantle of vulnerability that we need to assume when we are listening, so that we remember how we were at our most vulnerable moment, and then try to infuse the conversation with that perspective. So that would be the second thing that I would say. And then the third thing would be to actually be bold. And if we see racism, or if we see, insensitivity, or if we see a dehumanizing kind of, comment or action, that we call it out, and that we call it out no matter where we are. And sometimes it's harder to call that out, at the Thanksgiving dinner table than it is to call it out on some, website, or even in some college lecture hall,
Oh, true.
but
True.
yeah. So we call it out because chances are also at that Thanksgiving dinner table, we have more influence than we have in a whole lot of other settings. So we would do that. And one of the phrases that I've used, or one of the kind of tricks maybe that I've used in that regard, has been helpful to me, because I am not one who either easily does this or thinks it's particularly successful, and that is to just say, well, you're wrong, and just call out, just kind of, whether it's online or whether it's to do that. So how do you get around that judgmental aspect of it? And so a phrase that I've used a lot when someone says something that's racist or something is that, well, that's not my experience. And that's been a phrase, simple, it sounds too simple, but it's been very helpful, because that immediately disarms the person, because it's not a you statement, it's an I statement. That's not my experience. Right. I'm not necessarily saying you're wrong, but let's lay something else alongside of your experience, right, which may be different. And so that's a starting point. So I think in many ways, the question that you're asking has as its hardest part, how do we begin? Mm-hmm. And once we can figure out how we begin, then I think it's easier to take it to the next step. And then the final thing I would say about all that is that this is not something that is over and done in a day or one conversation, and it's hard. And I remember Bernice Powell Jackson, who is is a former officer of the United Church of Christ. She used to say, social justice is hard work. And of course, she had devoted her whole life to social justice. But it's true. It's really true. It's if you're relentless at seeking equity, at seeking to hear the voice of the marginalized, at seeking justice, then that's a struggle, and you have to fight against all kinds of forces, large and small, to be consistent on that path.